the intro music. Yeah! Woo!
Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel today. Pretty excited. I'm actually in a good mood, which is nice. It's been a while, and had a 2-hour-long conversation with the good overlords yesterday about various things, some updates that we're working on, as well as answering everything that y'all had question-wise about the survey that we did, about 2 months ago. So that's good. Have an update with that coming very soon. Keep your eyes peeled on that. But also, we've got an area in my Discord that I try to hit, I would say pretty regularly, that's set up for all content creators to view, and that is this one. The ability for you to suggest, hey, content, can you please make something? Now, I try to use the Discord as well as use my YouTube comments, Facebook comments, Twitter, everything to get y'all the content that you're looking for. In this particular instance, I had somebody come to me saying, hey, you just talked about the new Strange New World officers, but can you make it into a more palatable? Can you explain what all some of this means? And what they were talking about was mitigation and the battle log, how things are sorted. I think today would be a good time to go over that. And that person was Sam. Shout out Sam. Want to give you credit for it because you brought it up. So we're going to talk about how some of these things work. Yes, this is going to be a slightly mathy video, and I've done a video like this before covering battle logs. So we're going to cover some of the things that we've done before, as well as go into a little bit more detail. And it's easier to use this detail because there's so many amazing tools available to players now. We're going to go over and talk about some basic things from like QuirkyZombie's mitigation calculator to JuneBree's spocks.club battlelog reader. All these things that are allowing us to be better as content creators and as players in the game. So let's start covering that and go over some of the basics to begin with. Now, to do that, we're going to go with a fresh battle log. We're just going to a random battle log. How about this one where Citron just beat me? What was I doing? Yeah, it was my Valdor was just floating in space last night, and they came and popped it. Which, by the way, if you're looking for a crew to beat a Valdor, they did a fantastic job on an Enterprise. This is exactly what you should do, and that Enterprise is going to win like 20 times out of 20, 100 times out of 100 because of this loadout. So shout out to them. Even without a maxed Marcus, you see, able to easily take down a Lorca Killy Marcus, which that's not a bad PvP crew. It's generic, but they did some good damage there. So let's talk about the logs and how exactly they're laid out. So you have all the officers on the top of either side that are going to activate. So you see their activation right up here. More importantly, we're looking at just a random attack. So let's just look at this first one. Just look at a weapon firing. Here's damage created at the far right. See, deals damage. And then you hit 3 layers. Now talk about these 3 layers, and we're going to go into each one specifically. Layer 1, this is mitigation. Mitigation is the amount of damage that your ship never receives. It's like a glancing blow. Think about a boxer putting the Vaseline on their face and you're sliding off. That's what mitigation does. It prevents it from ever hitting your ship at all. The next layer is your shields, which shields transfer the damage either to the hull, or whatever amount is not stopped by the shields transfers to the hull. These shields will naturally stop 80% of any non-mitigated damage. So stop real quick. Mitigation, all this gone. Take out that 75,000. After that's gone, whatever's left. So 293 minus the 75,000, that's what's left. The shields will stop 80% of that unless there's an officer that changes this. Now, if you remember, one of the reasons we talked about Strange New World Pike being so good is he actually does change that number. He can knock this up to 94%, meaning you take even less hull damage, which is our final number. And the most important, hull damage. No matter what you are doing in this game, armadas, PvE grinding, hostiles, PvP, the main thing that makes you win or die is how much hull damage you take and how can you change that amount. When we're talking about officers that, we want to raise mitigation, it's because we want to take less hull damage. When we use officers like Uhura to fight Enterprises, or TOS Uhura that is, to fight Enterprises, because we're trying to get more damage past their shields to their hull. Hull health and hull damage are the main stats that we focus on in this, but how do we come up with all these different calculations? How do we understand how this log that looks simple but works Scopelymath complicated work? Well, let's cover that in this video. So let's start with mitigation. Now, mitigation is a little bit complicated until you see the formula, and with most of y'all being adults and everything who've gone through these math classes in high school, you're gonna be able to cover the basics, and I'll explain it as easily as I can. So here is how it works, and this is, by the way, listed on QuirkyZombie's mitigation calculator. I can throw that in the description of the video as well, but I'm gonna just quote them directly. You can read on the screen. Damage mitigation has 3 components: armor, shield deflection, and dodge. For each component, divide the corresponding defense value by the corresponding piercing value. Example, you would divide armor by armor piercing. Look up the mitigation in the chart below, which is provided for you here on the screen. Finally, weight each individual mitigation value by 0.3 for surveys, which armadas will run the same thing if I'm remembering correctly, 0.3, or 0.55 for a combat ship's primary defensive stat, or 0.2 for secondary. Now, what does that mean? Well, so glad that you asked. Here, we'll take this off the screen real quick and show you what it means. So, bloop, here's my Valdor. Valdor is an explorer. You can denote that by the icon next to the name up here. Its primary stat is going to be shield deflection, also denoted easily in this log by the fact that that's what it has so much of. So we would actually be taking our shield deflection, and then we have shield piercing from the enemy. Now, remember that this is just showing the standard shield piercing. This doesn't include what that Marcus gave them in this fight. But that's what you would be calculating here, is the shield deflection with the shield piercing. So there's a 1-to-1 here, but there's a value system to each one. So because this is the primary stat of an explorer, that's what's going to have the biggest weight, that 0.55. So, whoops, I didn't mean to put you back on the screen, Sam. Apologies. So let's put this back on the screen. So if you see the formula for mitigation here, 1, which we always talk about being a base 1, and you're going to see the various formulas put in here with, you know, your armor piercing and armor equation. You're going to have your shield deflection, shield piercing, and then your dodge and your accuracy. All works together to then give you what you're looking for, which is going to be that function, which corresponds with this nice little pretty graph right here that you can follow that never quite reaches 1, but will get continuously closer and closer to infinity and beyond. So this is the function for it. The simplest way to put this is each ship that is a combat ship has a value to a specific deflection or mitigation stat. If it's an explorer, that's shield deflection. If it is a battleship, that's armor. And if it is an interceptor, that is going to be dodge. And your ability to negate that is going to affect the amount of mitigation you take. Now, I know we just did a lot of rambling on words, but we gave you the math so that you can work this out if you want. Let's go back to that log that we have with Citron. You can see here, mitigation, we can do a rough calculation of this. So if he did 293,000 damage, or 293,000, how much did I mitigate of that? Not very much, 75,650. I did, whew. So if we do 75,650 divided by 293,101, we get 25.8%. Now, if you go back to this little icon, well, you would think that my shield deflection would be plenty to stop their piercing. That's where Marcus came in, because Marcus's officer ability raised that shield piercing up by using officer stat stacking. And thus my mitigation, which normally would have been somewhere between, high 50s or 60s, dumps down to 25.8, meaning I stopped very little damage here. So that is critical. That's why phase 1 is so important. We talk about working on your piercing or your mitigation stats because of how it can affect in game. Now, let's keep it moving, because that's not the only layer. Let's talk about officers that affect the actual shields and the transfer rate for how much damage stops by the shields or gets bypassed into the hull health. So the PvP one that we tend to always focus on is going to be TOS Uhura. The reason we focus on TOS Uhura is because enterprises are prevalent in this game, but her officer ability is this one right here, modulation frequency found. When fighting players, as long as the ship has morale, removes 12% of the shield mitigation of the opponent's ship. Now, what does that mean? Now, if we want to do some more quick math, let's go back to that battle log that we were just in. I know it's a math episode, but it's easy to understand if you just take these 10 minutes. So we figured out what mitigation is and how it works. So we know how to calculate our mitigation. So now what we need to do, let's take that damage that we had, 293,101, and subtract 75,650, which means that there's 217,000 damage left. Now, if I were to multiply that by 0.8, so 80%, I should, in theory, get the correct number for what's left, which means that if I multiply that by 0.8, I'm gonna get 173,960. And if we do that math and do 217,451 and subtract 173,960, we're gonna get 43,490. Well, I'm missing by 1 because there's a decimal there and there's some rounding. but that's how we determine shields. So I still stopped 80%, but I took a lot of hull damage because I wasn't able to mitigate much of their damage. So in this case, if it was TOS Uhura was here, what TOS Uhura would have done is instead of me stopping 80%, I would have stopped 68%. So that meant 12% more of that non-mitigated damage would have gone directly to my hull. And you can, once again, you can calculate that. Put 217,451 back in your calculator, multiply it, and this time, since we would stop 68, you could just multiply it by, 0.32. That means I would have taken 69,584 damage. That makes sense? Here, I didn't have it on the screen, so let me put the calculator on the screen. We can just look at it with the calculator. Bam. So this is the math. So if I did 217, it was the damage remaining after mitigation. If TOS Uhura had been there, I would have taken more directly to the hull. Now, the counter to TOS Uhura is the fact that, well, if your shields go down, her ability no longer matters. But while the shields are up, that's what makes her so particularly effective against enterprises, because generally they're running around, their shields won't go down. So that is why we have so much value in these different officers, and why shield manipulation is probably my favorite way they could have addressed the new meta or most effective tactics available for PvE grinding. And that is the entire theme of the new officers that we have with this strange new world, Pike and Spock, and new officers that will come out in this arc as well. That we're focusing on changing that as well as mitigation instead of the pure damage reduction we had before. Now it is a little bit different. There's a reason they went with this method. But let's come down to Pike. We've talked about him, but let's look at him again. Prepared for anything. When fighting hostiles, Pike increases your shield mitigation by 4% without synergy, or 14% with max synergy. And on the flip side of that, quick thinking, when fighting hostiles, decreases that shield mitigation by 10% at tier 1, and this climbs as he tiers up. So not only are you affecting mitigation and piercing in the battle log, but now you're focusing on shields in that second level. Then last but not least, this is the most important stat. This is the one that everybody has to focus on. Everybody. I don't care who you are. You've got to. Hull damage. This is probably, I don't even want to say probably, this is what it all comes down to. Now, this is JuneBree's spocks.club tool that we use for not only for battle logs. There's so many great things on there, like the research efficiency buffs to show you what research works and how it applies in your game. But what we're really focusing on is the damage here. How much hull damage are we taking? The total hull damage is what matters. And that's how we build out our crews. That's how we build out and find out that Pipe Moro Chin is the best for grinding like a level 45 trader. And that's how we find out what's best for PvP. It comes down to what causes or forces us to take the least amount of hull damage. And that's how the logs are set up. Logs are set up that same way. There's 3 layers. There are complexities inside each layer. But with that, we now know the mitigation formula, so we can calculate it if we want to, or preferably just check out QuirkyZombie's mitigation calculator. Makes it way easier. You don't have to do it. And now we know how shields work. And then finally, we understand that the most important thing is hull damage. So, as an attacker, you want to create as much damage as possible, but you want effective damage, efficient damage. Efficient damage is what you had from Citron in this log behind me. He was efficient because he used crews to overcome me. Couple things that he did. Look at Yuki's ability. Not only will Yuki strip my shields and get rid of them, but Yuki's also great versus Romulan ships, giving you a damage boost, increasing the amount of damage that you create. Secondly, you've got the shield piercing buff here that Marcus allows you to take that, remember that bonus weighted I had, that 0.55? I'm an explorer, I'm strong with shields, you have to overcome that? Well, he did. And because of that, I actually now take a bigger penalty because of my multiplier, because it takes up a majority of what my mitigation score is built around. So that's how you're able to just completely dump somebody's mitigation to the floor and put more damage on them with warships. It's a lot easier to do that with these strategies. And then last but not least, you've got the Yuki ability right there with the shield strip, thanks to synergy with Marcus. So this is a little bit more of an in-depth look at battle logs, how they're constructed, and how you can calculate the damage that's happening in your game. And hopefully this helps you better prepare yourself for when you're going out. Now, if it's all too complicated and you're like, yo, I just want to know how things work and I just want to know what crews to put, cool. That's what the comment section and the Discord are for. Hit us up and we will help you. Just like, hey, I've got a D4. What's a good generic crew? Well, Lorca, Tilly, Honor Guard, Worf. Good generic crew. But if you say, hey, I lost an Enterprise, I'm going to say, hey, why don't you go try Marcus Merritt Krell or, you know, there's a lot of different crews that you can try for this, but it comes down to understanding how this works. And hopefully this answers your video. And once again, shout out to the person who requested it, Sam. And Sam, God, I hope I answered your question in this 15 minutes, because if I didn't, I feel like a real big dum-dum. Live long and prosper. Stay safe there, Space Cowboys. Deuces, that's me. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, smash that like button. I'll catch you on the next one.
An even better outro than the intro. For the Empire and glory to your house.